Jennifer, we've got our COVID update. One of the things that we had talked about, Malcontents, on the editorial board, we will be doing 5 fast facts for COVID on at least one time a week. And I think unless there's some really big story attached to COVID, that's what we're going to kind of squish it down into those 5 fast facts. So Jennifer, I'm going to drop you 5 fast facts. There
right.
actually is, and I'm not being sarcastic, there is a little glimmer of good news in this, but I don't think it's as good as people think. But we're not going to start with good news. When we were preparing to go on air, it was 399,000 Americans who have died of COVID. And that was as of 9 p.m. East Coast time. So we don't have the full data in. Pretty good chance we will roll over 400,000 tonight. We will definitely roll over 400,000 tomorrow. An American is dying about every 30 seconds from COVID-19. And what we're seeing right now is this is actually from Thanksgiving weekend, this spike in deaths that we're seeing. Jennifer and I both have a cough. It's not COVID.
Yes, yeah.
It takes, like, you get exposed, it takes maybe 2 weeks to get the symptoms, then it takes maybe a week to get sick enough to be in the hospital, and then you might be in the hospital for 2, 3, 4, 6 weeks before you finally succumb from the symptoms. So the spike in fatalities that we're seeing aren't for Christmas. We won't see those until probably when we get into March. So
Yeah.
Donald Trump, right before we went on air, what a guy. He lifted the travel restrictions between the United States, most of Europe, including the United Kingdom and also Brazil. The United Kingdom is home of a strain that has even Boris Johnson so convinced, holy shit, that he's basically shut the entire country down. And it was announced last week that Brazil has their own very contagious variant. But Donald Trump is like, no, it's cool. UK, come on to the United States.
Oh, please. That's his middle finger on the way out the door.
It is a total middle finger on the way out the door. I mean, there's nothing rational or excusable for it. Now, the good news, COVID cases are down in 35 states. I'm not being sarcastic. They are down in 35 states, and they are starting to see the number of hospitalizations and deaths are starting to hit the plateau. But as I said earlier, Jennifer, what I really think that we're seeing here is that Thanksgiving spike is plateauing out. We'll see numbers go down for maybe about 3 weeks, and then we're going to start seeing the Christmas travel spike.
Yeah. So when do we hit the insurrection infections?
It's like, right. And then how many people in that insurrection, forget COVID, how many of them were exposed to UK variant or even worse, potentially South African variant?
Yeah.
In some local news, something that I found out today, we didn't have enough information to run this story. This is one of those trust verified, but not enough to write up a story on it on malcontentnews.com. Thousands of doses of COVID-19 vaccines were lost in Washington state because of the windstorm event last week. And what happened is when over 500,000 people lost power, the chillers and freezers that were required to keep those doses super cold failed. And there is an unknown number of doses that have been destroyed, but it is in the thousands.
Wow. That's great news on the top of on the heels of last week when, we found out there are no vaccine stores.
Yes, exactly. By the way, there actually is no reserve. This raises questions to me. Why weren't these things on backup generators? Why weren't are you kidding me? Right? We live in an era where you got to be ready for the 9-0. You got to be ready for the 9-0 earthquake. 9-0, 9-0, 9-0, 9-0. Are you kidding?
Yeah. No, I agree.
Rebekah Jones, this is the 5th one. She was originally hailed at the start of COVID almost a year ago as one of the best data scientists in the country and for creating one of the most transparent and accurate dashboards for public and researchers. She was fired by Rob DeSantis, who didn't like the publicity about what a shit show is handling with things in the state of Florida. There was a message that went out through the internal communication systems to employees in Florida a few months ago, imploring them to come forward as whistleblowers if they knew that Florida was cooking the books. Rebekah Jones became suspect number one. Her house was searched. The search warrant was considered very dirty. There was really a lot of questions on the legality of the search warrant. The reality is she has been criminally charged with a felony for sending that message.
So for trying to expose the ways in which, Florida was basically contributing to the intensification of the COVID issue, can potentially do jail time while Ron DeSantis can, save the economy but kill off a bunch of people in the process.
Well, and he's really not saving the economy in Florida. If you look at the number of Disney employees that continue to get laid off, empty hotels, there's no travel going on. And Florida also has one of the weakest safety nets. What a shock for the unemployed.
Yeah. No, I actually had a friend that went to visit family in Florida over the holidays, and he was telling me how insane it is down there as far as like social distancing and masking and things being open, and it's very crazy. And he had to test and quarantine and quarantined after. But still, I mean, it's insane to me that they do this kind of stuff. People like Ron DeSantis do this kind of stuff and then guise it as necessary to save an economy that clearly isn't reaping any benefit from this.
Basically, yes. So we will continue to monitor the Rebekah Jones story. In theory, man, my throws are off. I'm Jewish white boy. I'm allowed to say it because I am a Jewish white boy. I am showing my Jewish white boy athleticism tonight. So we'll follow the Rebekah Jones story. And it is possible that by the time Joe Biden becomes president of the United States, Chuds,
cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers,
that there could be up to 405,000 COVID deaths, which would equal all of the deaths this country had in World War II. So the only thing worse in American history then becomes the Civil War and the 1918 flu pandemic, and those two are about tied. And a reminder, Malcontents, at 12:01 p.m., Joe Biden, as far as the Republican Party will be concerned, will be responsible for 400,000 COVID deaths. He will also be responsible. It'd be his fault that there's 8 million more people that are below the poverty line. He will be responsible for the recession, and he will also be responsible for $7.7 trillion added to the national deficit.
I know. I was going to say, don't forget the deficit.
Oh, don't forget that. Yes.
Yeah.
The deficit. Can't forget the deficit.
Yeah. Always the deficit.